We often think of architecture as just bricks, mortar, steel, and glass. The tangible stuff, right? But behind literally every physical structure is a hidden, often complex, framework of ideas. Today on The Explainer, we're unpacking the dialectical relationship between architectural theory and praxis, and we'll be exploring exactly how the spaces we inhabit are born from deep, constantly evolving philosophies.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, defining architectural theory. Second, the three branches of theory. Third, how those theories evolve. Fourth, understanding praxis. And fifth, object and context in praxis.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Defining Architectural Theory. Now, humans have obviously been building things for millennia, but formal architectural thought, that really kicked off as a practical guide with Vitruvius. He was a Roman architect and engineer who wrote the 10 books on architecture way back in the 1st century BCE. His work covered the whole shebang: material properties, geometry, site orientation. But incredibly, this foundational text essentially vanished. It was lost for 1,500 years. It wasn't until it was finally rediscovered that it helped spark the Renaissance, leading Leon Battista Alberti to publish his own 10 books in the late 15th century, modeling them very closely after Vitruvius.
Since Alberti's time, the field has just absolutely exploded. If we had to pin down a comprehensive definition of what all these thousands of texts are actually talking about, it's this. Architectural theory is the evolution of the objective principles and subjective values that guide individual and collective decisions about and assessments of architectural works. And keep in mind, unlike the natural or social sciences, theories in architecture often emerge from highly individualistic paradigms. They often come straight from the personal, subjective writings of the architects themselves.
Notice how that definition kind of splits right down the middle into two distinct, honestly sometimes clashing halves. On one side, we have objective principles. These are the undeniable scientific facts, the laws of gravity, structural integrity, lighting, acoustics. But on the other side, we have subjective values. These are belief systems and cultural ideologies encompassing aesthetic predilections and even political agendas. Architecture is basically the ultimate balancing act between these two very different forces.
And that precarious balance brings us to a crucial takeaway from the American Institute of Architects. There is simply no architecture without a theory. Any architectural activity fundamentally requires it. Theory provides the underlying logic that prevents the building from just being a chaotic pile of materials. If the underlying theory is sound, the thought and the action behind a building are far more certain to actually succeed.
Moving right along to Section 2, the three branches of theory.
With thousands of texts out there, it can feel super overwhelming. But experts generally group the field into one of three main branches: technology, history, and design. Let's look at each one to understand how they shape the built environment.
First up is the theory of architectural technology. This focuses entirely on the scientific principles governing how buildings stand up and perform physically. If you're reading up on structural loads, material science, thermal dynamics, or acoustics, you're dealing with technology theory. The ultimate goal here is optimization. It's about using technical knowledge to make construction systems as efficient, resilient, and safe as humanly possible.
Next, we have theories of architectural history. This branch analyzes the built environment through a much more cultural and historical lens. It asks how social, political, and economic trends shape stylistic developments over time. Historians working in this space might use methods from sociology, anthropology, or even linguistics. For example, they might study the morphological form of a city over centuries, or use post-colonial theory to critique and reinterpret the architectural legacies left behind by imperial expansion.
The third branch is theories of architectural design. This one really centers on architecture as a creative art form. It's all about spatial organizations, aesthetics, and conceptual strategies. So when you hear about Frank Lloyd Wright's organic architecture, or phenomenological theories about how our bodies actually perceive space, or even modern parametricism, which uses complex algorithms to drive digital design, that all lives right here in design theory.
Okay, Section 3, How Architectural Theories Evolve.
Because here's the thing, as new evidence and societal norms pop up, these theories are never just static, they evolve. And they basically live or die based on two main criteria: empirical substance and cultural resonance. Empirical substance means the theory actually aligns with facts. It's validated by experts and peer review. As new research comes out, theories have to be refined to match physical reality. Cultural resonance, on the other hand, is all about societal acceptance. If a theory strongly contradicts the popular values or priorities of its time, its acceptance is absolutely going to decline, no matter how structurally sound the math might be.
Think about the evolution of the wheel. From a heavy slab of stone to modern rubber tires, the physical design constantly shifted to meet the cultural and technological zeitgeist of its specific era. Well, architectural theory works the exact same way. Because societal priorities are constantly shifting, older theories that fell out of favor can actually see massive resurgences later on when they're reinterpreted for a brand new era.
All right, let's get into Section 4, Understanding Architectural Praxis.
So, we've talked about abstract definitions, but how do these theories actually interact with physical, messy creation? That brings us to praxis. In architecture, praxis is defined as a continuous, dialectical relationship between thinking and making. It is heavily process-oriented. What's absolutely vital to grasp here is that praxis is about the excellence of the doing for the sake of itself, rather than just obsessing over the final product. It's that active, real-time conversation between your brain and your hands while you were designing.
To wrap your head around this, picture a continuous cycle of theory, action, and reflection. This draws heavily on Donald Schoen's 1983 concept of the reflective practitioner. Schoen basically argued that design is essentially reflection in action. An architect spins out a web of moves. Each tiny move, say tweaking a geometrical shape on a blueprint, is a local experiment. And these local experiments constantly feed back into the global experiment of reframing the entire design problem. It is a constant, never-ending looping cycle of trying, thinking, and adjusting.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Object and Context in Praxis.
This cycle of thinking and making we just talked about is generally applied in two distinct ways: object-oriented praxis and context-oriented praxis. Object-oriented relies heavily on architecture's internal sources. You're experimenting directly with forms, structures, and materials. Context-oriented praxis, on the other hand, looks outward. It considers the external factors, the social, political, and environmental world that the architecture is actually going to exist within. To see this in the real world, consider projects like the ICD/ITKE Research Pavilion. It is a textbook case of object-oriented praxis. The theoretical knowledge in a project like that is produced through direct physical experimentation. By building mock-ups, prototypes, and full-scale material models, architects learn directly from the behavior of the materials themselves during the design process. They're letting the object teach them.
Meanwhile, context-oriented praxis produces theory by looking critically at human behavior. Think about how daily social interactions or community sightlines dictate a floor plan. This type of praxis reflects on external realities. For example, an architect practicing this way might study how changing family structures over the last few decades dictates a need for completely new types of housing, or how an area's natural native landscape should strictly dictate the form of a new settlement.
Ultimately, these are definitely not competing ideas. They are two sides of the exact same coin. A true mastery of architecture requires synthesizing both. You absolutely need the object-oriented insights you get from direct material experimentation, but you equally need the context-oriented awareness of the complex human and environmental influences going on around your building.
And that brings us to the end of today's explainer. Knowing that architecture is just this constant, thrilling tightrope walk between science and society, between making and reflecting, here's the big question to walk away with. How will you personally synthesize objective principles with subjective values in your own work? Keep questioning, keep reflecting, and keep building. See you next time.